No one expected the starving animal to be a lion. When Ethan Cole pulled open that camouflaged wooden door hidden in the canyon, he had no idea his entire life was about to change. Lying at the bottom was a dying lion, broken, starved, and clinging to its last breath. The moment Ethan chose to save him was the moment a story began, one that would soon shock the world. The call came just after sunrise, when the Wind River Mountains were still wrapped in that soft blue haze that makes the world look half asleep. Ethan Cole was finishing his first cup of coffee, the kind he brewed strong enough to wake the dead, when the radio crackled to life. A rancher from the far edge of the district reported something strange, an eerie, fading sound drifting out of a narrow canyon behind his property. He couldn't describe it well, only said it sounded like something big trying real hard not to die. Most folks around here mistook coyote yelps or elk groans for 100 different things, but something in the man's voice settled wrong in Ethan's chest. Fear, bewilderment, and something deeper, something people only feel when the world stops sounding the way it should. He got in his truck, the old Forest Service green one, with paint sun-bleached to the color of dried sage, and drove toward Wind River Canyon. The gravel cracked beneath his tires, and the air carried the smell of cold pines and dust. Wyoming had always felt like a living thing to him, breathing with the wind, whispering through the grass. But that morning, it felt unnaturally still. As he stepped out, he scanned the horizon. No circling vultures, no movement in the brush, no track marks, nothing that matched a large, injured animal. Yet the rancher hadn't sounded confused. He'd sounded shaken. Ethan followed the faint trail leading toward a line of craggy boulders where the canyon pinched into a narrow throat. The sun struck the rock in sharp angles, turning everything bright and blinding. He paused, listening. Nothing. No growl, no rustle, just the steady beat of his own breath. Still, soldiers who fight wildfires learn early that silence is rarely empty. Sometimes it hides the heat. Sometimes it hides something worse. He walked deeper, boots crunching against loose shale, scanning for the smallest sign: fur, blood, even disturbed soil. But the ground looked untouched. Wind stirred the tall grasses gently, like fingers brushing through hair. Birds called somewhere far off, cheerful and careless, cutting through the tension gathering between Ethan's ribs. He was about to turn back when a faint sound drifted up from somewhere below, a low, broken rumble, so weak it barely rose above the wind. It wasn't the cry of a coyote or the breath of a wounded elk. It sounded heavier, raw, fading. Ethan froze, heart thumping once, hard, before instinct propelled him forward. He dropped to his knees beside the rocks, scanning every shadowed crevice. The rumble came again, softer this time, like a breath slipping away. He pressed his hand to the ground, feeling for vibration. Nothing. But his gut kept pulling him toward a cluster of brush tangled against the canyon wall. At first glance, it looked like just another patch of wind-thrown debris. But the branches were too neatly arranged, too deliberately woven together, as if someone had crafted a cover rather than nature laying one down. Ethan brushed aside a layer of dried sage and juniper twigs. Beneath it, hidden by a mat of dead leaves, he saw a seam, a straight edge, wood, not stone, and beneath that wood, just the faintest echo of warm, rotting air. His pulse kicked. Someone had built a door here, a door to something meant not to be found. He slid his fingers under the edge, lifted slowly. The hinges groaned in protest, revealing a dark hole cut into the earth, nearly invisible unless you were kneeling right on top of it. A sour wave of heat and decay rolled upward, thick enough to claw the palo. It was... Ethan recoiled instinctively, eyes watering. Then he leaned closer, shining his flashlight down into the shadows. What he saw wasn't clear, not yet, just a shape, collapsed against the dirt, massive and unmoving except for the shallow rise of its chest. A patch of matted fur glinted in the thin beam of light. Golden. Faded. Barely there. Ethan felt his breath catch. Not from fear, but from the eerie certainty that whatever lay below him was clinging to life by its last thread, and that he was the only person within miles able to hear it calling. His hand tightened on the edge of the trapdoor. For reasons he couldn't yet understand, he knew the moment he opened it fully, nothing about this day or his life would stay ordinary. The wood scraped against packed dirt as he lifted it higher, letting more of the fetid air escape. It rolled up like breath from a dying furnace, thick, hot, sour with rot. Ethan forced himself not to recoil, though his body instinctively wanted distance. Whatever was down there had been suffering a long time. He lowered the flashlight again, sweeping the bottom of the pit with a slow, steady beam. At first, the shape below looked like a boulder wrapped in weeds. Then it shifted, barely, painfully, and the truth struck him so hard he lost his breath. A lion. A young male, no older than 3 or 4 years, his body collapsed in a twisted heap. His ribs jutted like skeletal branches under skin stretched too tight. His mane was patchy, filthy, stripped of its golden strength. Even from above, Ethan could see the animal's breathing was thin, fluttering like a candle in a draught. For a long moment, he simply stared, unable to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he understood about this land. Wyoming was home to cougars, bears, elk, wolves, but not lions, not African lions. Yet here one was, lying at the bottom of a man-made trap 10 feet beneath American soil, a living ghost, a creature that should have belonged half a world away. Ethan leaned farther over the edge, studying the structure. The walls were reinforced with scavenged planks and pieces of sheet metal, hammered together just enough to prevent collapse. The top had been disguised with meticulous care, branches tied with twine, rocks placed in unnatural symmetry. Whoever built this hadn't been careless or desperate. They had been organized, confident, experienced. His gaze returned to the lion. A steel collar, thick, crudely welded, hung around its neck, attached to a chain bolted into the wall. The chain was slack now, buried under the lion's weight, but deep gouges marred the dirt where it had once fought to reach the walls. Ethan swallowed hard. The animal must have tried again and again to climb out, shredding its paws, only to fall back each time. Weeks of captivity and starvation had done the rest. God, he whispered under his breath, not as an oath, but as a prayer. He fished for his radio, thumb pressing the emergency channel. Dispatch, this is Cole. I've located a subterranean trap. Looks man-made. There's a large injured animal inside, severely malnourished. I need a rescue team out here now. Static crackled, followed by a voice filled with surprise. Copy that, Cole. You say, what kind of animal? He hesitated, still unsure if speaking it would make it any more real. A lion. African lion, male. A long pause. Say again? You heard me, he replied quietly. This is some kind of live holding pit. Big-time poaching setup. Send the Federal Wildlife Unit. And hurry. He clipped the radio back to his vest, breath shaking. Below him, the lion barely acknowledged the sound. Just one ear twitched, a feeble motion, like a whisper from a body too tired to move. Ethan shifted position to get a better look. The animal's flanks were sunken so deeply, it seemed impossible for a heartbeat to live inside. Dried blood clung to its hind leg where fur had peeled away. Its paws, once powerful enough to topple prey, were raw, stripped to exposed skin from clawing at the walls. And its eyes. When the beam of Ethan's flashlight brushed across them, one lid lifted halfway. The eye beneath looked cloudy, darkened by dehydration, but there was something else. Something that made Ethan's chest tighten. It was watching him, not with fear, not with aggression, just a quiet, exhausted awareness, as if it recognized him, not as a threat, but as the first living thing in weeks that wasn't there to hurt it. "I'm here," Ethan murmured, lowering himself closer to the opening. "Hang in there, big guy." A soft, broken rumble escaped the lion's chest, so faint he felt it more than heard it. A breath, a plea, a shiver of life refusing to surrender. He scanned the pit again, assessing every angle. No ladder, no footholds. The sides were too steep, too smooth from years of use. There was only one way in, and no safe way out. Not without equipment, not without a team. And time was slipping through the lion's fingers like water through a cracked bowl. Ethan tried to calculate how long it had been down there. With no water, no prey, no shade from the blistering daytime heat, 3 weeks felt likely, maybe more. The fact it was still breathing at all was a miracle. He drew a slow breath, forcing his mind into the disciplined calm he'd learned in wildfire response. When flames roared and men panicked, logic was the only thing that saved lives. But logic here whispered a brutal truth. The lion would not last until the team arrived. Not without help, not without stabilization. His flashlight beam revealed something else. Bones scattered in the corner. Rabbits, prairie dogs, maybe animals the trap builders had thrown down periodically to keep their prisoner barely alive. It twisted Ethan's stomach. Someone had done this intentionally, purposefully, and judging by the size and structure of the pit, this wasn't their first time. He lowered the door fully, setting it aside. Then he kneeled at the edge, lowering his voice to something soft, steady, unthreatening. "I'm not leaving you, I promise." The lion blinked once, slow and heavy, an act that seemed to drain the last of its strength. Ethan reached for his phone, snapped several photos: collar, chain, wall structure, trapdoor, the lion itself. Evidence. If this pit belonged to a trafficking ring, federal investigators would need everything. The wind shifted, whispering through the canyon. Shadows grew longer. Every instinct told Ethan that this wasn't just a trap. It was a secret someone planned to return to. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect what they'd built. He stood and scanned the horizon, searching for tire tracks, footprints, anything. Nothing. Only the vast, indifferent wilderness stretching miles in every direction. His heart thudded with a strange mix of dread and determination. He looked back into the pit. The lion's side rose again, shallow, trembling, and Ethan knew with chilling certainty that those breaths would not last much longer on their own. "All right," he whispered. "You hold on just a little bit longer. Help's coming." Even as he said it, he felt the truth deepen inside him. Help would not come fast enough. The lion needed more, and Ethan Cole, whether ready or not, was now the only lifeline it had left in this world. He gripped the rope coil at his belt, eyes locked on the suffering creature below, and felt the first glimmer of a decision forming, one that would lead him far beyond regulation, far beyond safety, far beyond anything he'd ever imagined when he started his shift that morning. The decision that would change everything. Ethan stared down into the pit, as if waiting for the lion to breathe wrong, to give him some final sign he was making the right call. But there was nothing. No roar, no growl, not even a shudder of protest. Just the weakest rise and fall of a chest that seemed too defeated to fight anymore. A minute passed. Maybe 2. His radio crackled with the distant voice of dispatch requesting an update. But Ethan barely heard it. Time had thinned around him, stretched out until the only thing he could feel was the weight of responsibility pressing into his spine. He knew the rules. He knew the risks. But he also knew the truth so plainly, it was almost painful. If he waited for backup, this lion would die. And whatever cruelty had put it here, whatever network of hands had trapped, chained, and starved it, would win. Ethan exhaled through tight teeth, pulling the rope free and knotting it around a thick pine root jutting from the canyon wall. He gave it 2 sharp tugs to test its hold. Solid. The kind of anchoring point he'd trusted 1,000 times on fire lines and rescue cliffs. He pulled on his gloves and braced his boots at the pit's edge. "All right," he murmured under his breath, voice steadying itself. "You're not going out like this. Not on my watch." The lion didn't respond, not even with an eye twitch this time. Ethan swallowed hard, threw the rope over the edge, and began his descent. The walls of the pit were close, tighter than they'd looked from above. The air grew heavier with each foot he dropped, the stench thick enough to coat the back of his throat. Sweat gathered at his hairline, chilled instantly by the canyon's shadow. At 6 feet down, he paused, adjusting his grip and listening, half expecting the lion to erupt with instinctual fear now that a human body was entering its domain. But the creature made no move, no sound. It was as though life clung to it only in the faintest thread. Ethan continued lower. Dirt flaked from the wall under his boots, raining down softly around the lion's back. It still didn't react. By the time his feet touched the compacted soil at the bottom, Ethan could see every detail of the animal's suffering. The collar had worn raw circles into its neck. Flies hovered around wounds too deep and too old. The lion's paws, once weapons of power, were swollen and cracked, edges ringed with dried blood. Its breathing was shallow, far too shallow, and Ethan knelt slowly, careful not to make any sudden movement. "Hey," he whispered. "I'm here. I'm gonna help you, bud." The lion's eye fluttered open at the sound of his voice, just barely. And for the briefest second, so fast Ethan almost doubted he saw it, a glimmer passed through the dull amber. Not wild instinct, not fear, something softer. A flicker of recognition, or trust, or the desperate acceptance of a creature that had given up fighting its fate. Ethan's throat tightened. "Good boy, just stay with me." He set his emergency medical pack on the ground and unzipped it. He worked quickly, pulling out a small canteen and a portable IV kit designed for field rescues. He unscrewed the canteen and dipped 2 fingers into the water, lifting them to the lion's lips. The animal didn't move. He tried again, brushing a thin film of water across its tongue. This time the lion swallowed, barely visible but enough to spark a flicker of hope in Ethan's chest. "Attaboy," he murmured. "That's it. You take what you can." He prepared the IV line next, threading the catheter with practiced efficiency. Years of working fire rescues, trauma responses, and wildlife assists had hardened his nerves. But this was different. This was 1,000 pounds of predator lying inches from him, so weak it couldn't lift its head, yet still armed with instinct, teeth, and a history of pain. One wrong move, one misstep, and adrenaline could snap through the lion's exhausted body. But Ethan trusted what he saw in those glassy eyes. Not threat, but surrender. He inserted the needle as gently as he could into a vein near the lion's front leg. The skin was papery and hot with infection. He taped the line in place and hung the fluid bag from a bent piece of rebar jutting from the wall. Slowly, drop by drop, hydration began to enter the lion's bloodstream. "That's going to help you breathe," Ethan said softly. "Just stay with me, River." He didn't know why he called it that. River. Maybe because of Wind River Canyon. Maybe because something in the animal seemed like a current that had been dammed and starved of life. He didn't think about it too long. The name stuck. Ethan shifted to examine the lion's wounds. There were deep gashes along the hindquarters, likely from panicked jumping against the metal walls. Scar tissue crossed over older injuries, suggesting this wasn't its first time in captivity. His jaw clenched. Whoever had done this hadn't cared if the lion lived or died. They only cared if it survived long enough to transport. He placed a hand on the lion's shoulder, preparing to clean the largest wound. As he did, its eye opened again, slower this time, as though waking from underwater. It didn't pull away, didn't tense. Instead, the lion's eyelid drifted lower, almost like it welcomed the contact. Ethan paused, breath catching. "You're still fighting," he whispered. "You just need someone fighting with you." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Ethan cleaned the wounds, flushed out dirt and infection, and kept talking, not to calm the lion, but to keep himself steady. He'd never been this close to a creature so powerful, yet so broken. Every breath it took seemed like a fragile promise, one he had no right to expect would last. Above them, the canyon wind shifted again, sending a shiver of dust down the pit walls. Ethan glanced up, feeling the weight of the open world above them. Backup was on its way, 20 minutes, maybe more. But time felt thinner here, pressed against the lion's failing heartbeat. He looked down again. The IV drip had quickened the lion's breathing slightly. Still fragile, still weak, but not as fading as before. A flicker of relief warmed his chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance. Then, without warning, the lion's head moved a fraction of an inch. Ethan froze. The animal's nostrils flared, drawing in the scent of the human crouched over him. A low vibration, too gentle to be a growl, passed through the lion's throat. It wasn't aggression. It was something else. Something Ethan didn't yet understand. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." The lion's eye met his, and stayed there, not for a second, not for a breath, but with a strange, exhausted focus, as if trying to hold on to the only solid thing left in its shrinking world. Ethan swallowed hard. "River," he whispered again. "You're gonna make it out of this." The lion blinked once. Above them, faint sirens began echoing through the canyon walls. Ethan exhaled, not realizing he had been holding his breath. Help was coming. But the moment he'd stepped into this pit, into this animal's final fight for life, the lines of his day had shifted, and something deep inside him knew. Nothing about his life would ever be the same again. He stayed crouched beside the lion, close enough to feel the faint warmth rising off its battered flank. River's breathing was uneven. 3 shallow inhales, a long pause, then a fragile exhale that trembled through its body as though even air had become too heavy to carry. Ethan watched the movement, counting each breath like a medic watching over a soldier. It was the same rhythm he'd memorized years ago during wildfire seasons, kneeling beside men who were barely clinging to consciousness. That same quiet hope, that same dread. But River was different. This was no man, no partner on a fire line, no animal native to these mountains. This creature wasn't supposed to exist here at all, much less in a hole carved by human hands. And yet, lying broken in the dirt, it was fighting just the same. Fighting with a strength that seemed both ancient and heartbreakingly desperate. Ethan reached toward River's shoulder, moving slow, steady, so the lion could see every inch of his approach. His fingers brushed the coarse, matted fur. Beneath it, he felt the sharpness of ribs, too many, too pronounced. River didn't flinch. Instead, the lion's eye opened again, sluggish, heavy, and met his with a depth that startled Ethan to stillness. The gaze wasn't fierce, wasn't wild, wasn't even defensive. It was the look of a creature who had endured more suffering than any living thing should, yet somehow still held on to a small, flickering ember of trust. Ethan swallowed hard. "You're a tough one," he murmured, voice low, steady. You've held on longer than anyone had a right to expect. River blinked slowly, that single eye tracking the movement of Ethan's hand as though it mattered, really mattered, that someone had finally come. Ethan continued cleaning the worst gash, wiping away grime and dried blood. The lion didn't growl, didn't tense. Not even when Ethan pressed near exposed flesh. Its body remained still, surrendering to the touch, to the help, in a way that felt unnatural for a predator. You've been down here too long, Ethan whispered. Too damn long. The wind moaned softly above the pit, stirring loose dirt across the lion's back. Ethan shielded River's face with his arm, brushing the dust from its muzzle. The lion's eyelid fluttered, but it didn't look away. There was something in that gaze, a plea, maybe, or a question, or something older than language, something instinctive and quiet. Don't leave me. Ethan wasn't used to reading emotion in an apex predator, but this felt unmistakable. You're not alone anymore, he said, almost under his breath. River's breathing hitched again. Ethan checked the IV line. The flow was still good. The fluids seemed to be helping, but dehydration this severe didn't reverse quickly. The lion's ears twitched weakly, and when Ethan leaned closer, he noticed fresh abrasions inside the fur, marks from banging against the metal walls, marks of despair, marks of an animal that had tried to climb out until its strength ran dry. His jaw clenched. Whoever put River here hadn't cared if he starved. They had only cared that he lived long enough to be transported out. Every detail, the collar, the cage-like walls, the disguised cover, spoke of organization and cruelty. A kind of coldness Ethan had seen only in the worst corners of disaster work. He took a steady breath. He couldn't think about that now. The lion shifted suddenly, just an inch, but enough to stop Ethan's heart for a beat. River's muzzle brushed against Ethan's knee, not aggressively, not in fear, more like reaching out. A gesture so quiet, so exhausted, it brought a sharp sting to Ethan's eyes. Easy, he whispered. I'm right here. The lion's tail twitched once, no more than the faintest brush of movement. But to Ethan, it felt like a signal. A sign River was trying, even if his body was failing. Sirens in the distance grew closer, bouncing off the canyon walls in faint echoes. Ethan looked upward but didn't rise to greet them. He stayed by River's side, grounding himself in the dim, suffocating space. The rescue team would arrive any moment, but for reasons he couldn't name, he didn't want to leave the lion's view. He wanted River to know, needed River to know, that he wasn't going to vanish the moment help showed up. You're gonna feel hands on you in a minute, he said softly. Not mine, but they're good people. They're here to help. The lion's ear flicked again, barely perceptible, but it was enough to tell Ethan that River heard him, that River understood something in his voice, if not the words themselves. For a moment, Ethan forgot everything else. The rules he'd broken, the danger he'd placed himself in, the fact that he was sitting inches from a 1,000-pound predator. All he felt was an unexpected connection, fragile as the lion's breathing, yet unmistakable as the earth beneath him. Then River's eye drifted shut, not like surrender this time, but like a release, a moment of rest. Trust. The kind of trust no wild animal should ever give a stranger. Ethan placed one steady hand on River's mane, brushing gently through the coarse strands. Hold on, he whispered. Help's almost here. Boots thudded above, voices echoed. A rope ladder dropped into the pit, but Ethan didn't move. Not until one of the rescuers called down, "Cole, you all right?" Ethan looked up but spoke quietly. "I'm not leaving him until he's secured." And when he looked back down, River was watching him again, eyelids half lifted, just enough to confirm what Ethan already felt in his chest. They were in this together now, whether either one of them understood it or not. The rescue team reached the rim of the pit within seconds, their boots scraping against gravel and loose shale as they leaned over the edge. Flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping over Ethan, then settling on the frail, unmoving shape at his feet. A few gasped quietly. Even seasoned rangers weren't prepared for the sight of a lion starved down to bones, chained like some forgotten prisoner beneath Wyoming soil. "Cole, talk to us," one of the rescuers called down. "Is it stable? Can we move in?" Stable was not a word Ethan could use. Not honestly. River's breaths were thin and fading again, and every rise of the lion's chest now carried the staggering weight of uncertainty. Still, Ethan answered, "He's alive, but barely. We need to get him out, carefully. Bring the cradle down." The team immediately set to work. A reinforced animal transport cradle, narrow enough to fit inside the pit, sturdy enough to hold a half-ton predator, was lowered by 2 ropes. Metal clanged against stone as it descended. Dust swirled in the stale air. Ethan shielded River's eyes with his hand until the cradle touched down beside them. 2 rangers began climbing down the rope ladder, their movements tense, their eyes darting between Ethan and the dying lion. One of them, a younger ranger named Mike Havers, barely out of academy training, looked like he was trying not to shake. "Sir, that's a lion," Mike whispered. Ethan almost smiled at the obviousness of it. "Yeah, well, he's not in any shape to argue with us today." They knelt on either side of River. Ethan guided their hands, explaining exactly where to grip, how to avoid touching raw wounds, how to support the lion's fragile weight. When they tried to lift, River let out a sound, more a breath than a growl, but the vibration of pain trembled through its chest. "Easy, big guy," Ethan murmured, lowering his voice. "I know. We're going slow." Working in near silence, they maneuvered River onto the cradle. The lion's body sagged onto the metal slats like a wet cloth, his limbs limp, his head lolling sideways. Ethan steadied the lion's jaw so it wouldn't strike the metal frame. River's eye opened for half a second, found Ethan's face, then slipped closed again. Once the lion was secured, the cradle began its ascent. The ropes strained. Every inch upward felt like a century. The men above pulled carefully, grunting under the shifting weight. Dust shook loose from the walls as the cradle scraped past. About halfway up, River's body jerked, just a twitch, but violent enough to rattle the ropes. "Hold it!" Ethan shouted from below. The team froze. Ethan watched for movement, for breath, for anything. After what felt like an eternity, the lion's body settled again. "Okay," Ethan called. "Keep going, nice and steady." When the cradle broke above the pit's rim, sunlight hit River's fur for the first time in weeks. The lion didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't blink, but Ethan felt something tighten in his chest at the sight. It was like watching a ghost return to the world of the living. He climbed the rope ladder next, emerging into the blinding daylight. His legs trembled when they hit the ground, but he didn't pause. He moved straight to the cradle, crouched beside River, and placed a steadying hand on the lion's shoulder again. "You're out," Ethan whispered. "We've got you." The team worked quickly. They loaded the cradle into the transport truck, an emergency wildlife ambulance equipped with medical monitoring equipment. Ethan climbed in with the medics, refusing every order to ride separately. "He responds to your voice," one medic said. "He might panic less if you stay." "Not leaving," Ethan replied softly. River was secured with padded straps while oxygen tubes were fitted loosely near his muzzle. The IV line remained in place, taped and stable. The lion's breathing was rapid but erratic, each inhale a struggle that rattled through the ambulance cabin. "Cole, watch for respiratory arrest," the medic warned. Dehydration at this level. His organs may already be failing. Ethan kept one hand near River's face, speaking in a low, steady rhythm. Stay with me, River. Just stay with me. The truck began moving, bouncing over rough terrain as they headed toward the emergency rendezvous point. Every jolt made River's body tremble. Twice the lion's breath seemed to stop entirely. His chest locked in a horrible stillness that made Ethan's heart seize. He's crashing, one medic shouted. Ethan leaned closer, placing 2 fingers gently near the lion's throat, feeling desperately for any sign of life. Nothing. Too long. Too still. No, don't you quit, Ethan muttered, then lifted River's massive head slightly, adjusting the airway angle. Come on. Breathe. The medic began chest compressions designed for large animals, slower, deeper, controlled. Seconds dragged like hours. Then River's chest convulsed, a thin, gasping inhale rattling into his lungs. He's back, the medic said. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The lion's eye remained closed, but a small tremor rippled through its shoulder. Weak, but there. Still fighting. They continued toward the highway, so focused on River's survival that none of them noticed the car parked far off in the distance, hidden between trees, engine idling. The tinted windows revealed nothing. The driver did not move, did not leave. Simply watched the ambulance pull away with a predator that was never meant to be found. 15 minutes later, on a narrow stretch of road surrounded by pines, River crashed again. No breathing. No response. Ethan slid his hands onto the lion's ribcage. Start compressions. The medic hesitated. Cole, he's too weak. His organs might... Now! Ethan barked, voice cracking. They worked together, Ethan adjusting the lion's airway, the medic pushing with controlled force. Sweat ran down Ethan's neck. His fists shook, not from fear, but from the terrible weight of knowing this could be River's last fight. A long, agonizing moment passed. Then River inhaled again, shallow, broken, but undeniable. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, head bowed. You're still here. Don't stop. By the time they reached the transfer point for the wildlife air transport, the lion had crashed twice more, each time pulling back from the brink with sheer, impossible will. The team lifted the cradle onto the transport trailer, connecting new monitoring equipment and fresh oxygen. Ethan stepped back, chest heaving, clothes streaked with dirt and sweat. As the aircraft doors opened, a medic whispered, "I've never seen an animal hold on like that." Ethan didn't answer. He just watched River's chest rise again, shallow but alive. He climbed into the plane, settling beside the cradle for the next leg of the journey. The engines rumbled to life. The floor vibrated beneath his boots. River's whiskers trembled in the artificial wind of the cabin fans. Ethan placed his hand back on the lion's shoulder. "I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. "Not now." And for the briefest moment, just as the plane lifted off, the lion's eyelid quivered, lifting half an inch. Enough for River's dull, amber eye to meet his one more time before slipping shut again. It was not the look of a dying animal. It was the look of one refusing to die. The small medical transport plane touched down on the runway of Haven Ridge Wildlife Center just before dusk, its wheels kicking up dust across the wide Montana plain. The sky burned a soft orange behind the snow-tipped mountains, and the air had that cold, clean bite only the northern states carried in early spring. As soon as the aircraft doors opened, a team in green scrubs and insulated jackets rushed forward with stretchers, equipment carts, and portable heaters. Their movements were sharp and methodical, people who'd seen emergencies before, who knew the difference between an animal in danger and one on the brink of disappearing forever. Dr. Lauren Hayes led them, walking quickly but with a steadiness that commanded instant respect. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back, her expression focused and unyielding. She'd run Haven Ridge for nearly 20 years and had treated everything from wounded moose to orphaned bear cubs, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight in front of her. When the cradle-carrying River was rolled down the plane's ramp, Lauren's breath caught so sharply she had to steady herself. "My God," she whispered, stepping closer. "He's nothing but bones." River lay nearly motionless, head turned weakly to the side as oxygen flowed across his muzzle. The warm lights from the hangar highlighted every ridge of his ribcage. His fur, once golden, looked gray under the fluorescent bulbs. His paws were cracked and swollen. His eyes remained closed, as if the weight of consciousness was too heavy to lift. But Lauren noticed something else, something small, something no one else on her team caught immediately. Ethan was walking beside the cradle, one hand resting lightly near River's mane, close enough for the lion to sense but not quite touching. And as they moved, River's whiskers twitched faintly toward the heat of Ethan's presence, almost like a compass needle tugged by a magnetic pull. Lauren frowned. "Who's handling him?" "I am," Ethan replied, keeping pace without taking his eyes off the lion. "Name's Ethan Cole. I found him." "You found him," she echoed, studying him. "In Wyoming?" He nodded once. The questions in her eyes were many, but she chose the most urgent. "How is he still alive?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. He's crashed several times, keeps coming back." Lauren exhaled slowly. "Then let's make sure that wasn't for nothing." The team rushed River into the main medical building, a converted aircraft hangar filled with stainless steel tables, warming pads, surgical lights, and rows of medical carts. As the doors swung closed behind them, the outside noise vanished, replaced by the sterile hum of machines and the soft clatter of instruments. "Let's get core temperature first," Lauren ordered. IV lines checked, blood panel started, set up for possible transfusion. Ethan stood back only when two staff members gently guided him aside. He was shivering, not from cold, but from the sudden emptiness of stepping away from the lion after hours of fighting for his life. His gloves were still stained with dust and dried sweat. His legs trembled from exhaustion. Lauren approached him. "You should sit. You're pale." "I'm fine," he said quietly, watching River being lifted onto a heated table. Lauren studied him for a long second. "You stayed with him, didn't you? During transport?" Ethan nodded. "Why?" He didn't have a clear answer, only the truth that rose in his chest before he could filter it. Because he wasn't ready to go, something in him. He's still holding on. Lauren glanced at River, then back at Ethan. In her line of work, she'd learned to read people quickly. Ethan wasn't reckless. He wasn't dramatic. He meant exactly what he said. "He trusts you," she murmured. Ethan blinked. "He doesn't even know me." "He knows something," she replied softly. "Animals don't waste energy on fear when they're dying, but they react to voices, smells, presence, and he's reacting to yours." Before Ethan could respond, River let out a sound, a low, broken rumble, more vibration than noise. It was faint but unmistakable. Every head in the room turned. The lion's eyelids fluttered open just an inch. His gaze didn't sweep the room, didn't search for danger. It locked straight onto Ethan standing several feet away. Lauren's jaw tightened in shock. "That's impossible," she whispered. Ethan took a slow step forward. "Hey, River," he murmured, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You made it. You're here now." River's gaze softened. There was no other word for it. The lion's breathing eased, his shoulders settling minutely into the table, the shallow tremor in his limbs quieting. Lauren looked from the lion to Ethan and back, her expression shifting through disbelief, concern, and something like wonder. "I've never seen that before, not with a wild lion, not even with one raised in captivity." Should I back away? Ethan asked. No, she said quickly, placing a hand on his arm. Don't move. The next hour became a blur of medical activity. River received warmed fluids, injections to stabilize his heart rhythm, antibiotics for infection, and slow oxygen support. X-rays revealed fractured paw bones, old bruising along the ribs, and severe muscle degeneration. Blood tests showed dehydration so advanced, Lauren was amazed he'd survived the trip. He's hanging by threads, she murmured. But every time she or another staff member reached toward the lion's head, River's breathing hitched, until Ethan spoke from beside the table. It's okay, River, they're helping. And each time River settled. Lauren finally put a hand on her hip, exhaling hard. All right, Cole, stay where he can see you, at least until we stabilize him. Gladly, Ethan answered. For the next several hours, the room's pace finally slowed. Medics rotated, machines beeped, monitors recorded, and outside, night crept across the Montana sky. Ethan stayed by River's side the whole time, saying little, just standing close enough that River could hear his voice or feel the faint warmth of a presence he recognized. As midnight approached, Lauren approached Ethan again. You've been on your feet for more than 12 hours, she said gently. You can rest now. We'll keep him stable. But Ethan shook his head, eyes heavy yet unwavering. If he wakes up scared, I don't want him to see strangers. Lauren hesitated. What makes you think he'll wake up? Because he's stronger than he looks, Ethan replied quietly. He's proved it all day. Lauren studied him again, this time with something like respect. We'll set up a cot, but I want you close enough to rest your own legs. If he improves, you'll need your strength. Ethan nodded. As the cot was placed in the corner of the room, Ethan walked to River one more time. He placed a hand near the lion's mane, not touching this time, just resting it on the table an inch away. River's eye opened again, just for a heartbeat, just long enough to find Ethan's face in the dim light. And for the second time that night, a sound rose from the lion's chest, a fragile, barely there rumble, like gratitude buried inside exhaustion. Ethan exhaled shakily. Yeah, he whispered. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. The lion's eye drifted closed again. Behind them, Lauren watched, her expression unreadable. Something extraordinary was happening in front of her. Something she could not explain. Something she knew would change everything. By sunrise, the medical bay was washed in pale gold, the kind of light that softened the edges of even the harshest nights. The hum of machines filled the room in a steady rhythm, steady enough to ease some of the tension from the long hours. Ethan hadn't slept. He tried. God knew he tried. But every time he closed his eyes, he heard River's broken breaths echoing in his head. So he sat upright on the cot, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the lion only a few feet away. River looked no stronger than he had hours earlier, but something in the stillness around him had changed. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a strange, persistent refusal to let go. Lauren stepped in just after 6, coffee mug in one hand, tablet in the other. She froze when she saw Ethan still awake. You didn't rest, she said softly. He shrugged. Didn't feel right. Lauren's eyes flicked toward River. He stabilized around 4 a.m. Vitals are fragile but steady. That's more than I expected. She hesitated. Honestly, I didn't think he'd make it through the night. Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't. The idea that River might have slipped away in the dark hours made his chest tighten in a way he wasn't prepared to unpack. Lauren placed her coffee on a steel table. I need to run a few more checks. You can stay. You seem to be helpful to him. Ethan nodded, but when she moved to examine River's side, something unexpected happened. The lion's eye opened, not groggy, not reflexive, alert. River's head lifted, just an inch, trembling violently, but lifted all the same. The movement was so slight it barely shifted his mane, yet it held a weight that rippled through the room like an electric current. Ethan froze. Lauren's breath caught. "Did you see?" she began, but River was no longer looking at her. He was looking at Ethan. Ethan stood slowly, stepping to the edge of the table without thinking. "Hey, River," he whispered. "You're all right. You're safe." The lion's jaw moved, not in a snarl, not in pain, but in a faint, deliberate gesture, as though trying to respond. River blinked once, the heavy eyelid dragging upward with effort, until their gazes locked tightly. Lauren stared, stunned. He shouldn't be able to move his head. His muscles are too atrophied. Ethan ignored her. His focus was on River, whose breathing eased slightly as Ethan drew closer. He placed a hand on the corner of the table, not touching, simply anchoring himself, and River shifted again, the tiniest attempt to lean toward the warmth of Ethan's presence. Lauren pressed a hand to her forehead. "This isn't normal. This is nowhere near normal." River lowered his head again, but not in defeat. It was a controlled descent, as if his body weren't collapsing, but choosing to rest now that Ethan was there. His eye stayed open, following Ethan's movement until it could no longer resist closing. Ethan exhaled shakily. "He's fighting." "He's attaching," Lauren corrected. "And under normal circumstances, that would be dangerous. Wild animals don't bond with humans. Not like this, not this fast." Ethan frowned softly. "Then why is he doing it?" Lauren shook her head. "Trauma. Survival instinct. Recognition of a single stable presence during crisis. It's not affection. It's imprint-like behavior. But whatever it is," she gestured helplessly toward the lion, "it is extraordinary." Minutes passed. River drifted in and out of consciousness, each time waking to the sound of Ethan's voice, each time settling the moment he saw him. The staff exchanged glances, whispered, observed, but no one interfered. A little after 8, Ethan stepped away to wash the grime off his hands. When he returned, River's breathing suddenly quickened. The lion's eyes cracked open, pupils narrowing with distress. Ethan hurried back. "I'm here," he said immediately. "Right here." River's chest eased. Lauren's eyebrows shot upward. "He responds to your absence and presence like a cub separated from its caretaker. This is beyond anything I've documented." Ethan placed his hand back on the table, as close as he dared. "Maybe he just needs consistency," he said quietly. "He's had nothing but pain for weeks." Lauren softened slightly. "Maybe, but for his recovery, for our safety, we need to understand what this is." As the hours passed, Ethan remained beside River while the staff conducted tests, cleaned wounds, and adjusted fluids. Each time someone touched River, Ethan stayed where the lion could see him. And each time River's breathing faltered, Ethan said the same thing, a low whisper that seemed to anchor the lion to the world. "You're not alone. Stay with me." At noon, the team prepared to turn River onto his other side, crucial to prevent pressure sores. They braced themselves. It would hurt. It would require strength the lion didn't have. 3 medics positioned themselves near the lion's torso, ready to shift the weight. But River lifted his head again, higher this time, eyes open, looking only at Ethan. The medics froze. "What is he?" one started. Lauren raised a hand sharply. "Don't move him yet. Let's see what he's doing." Ethan stepped close, gently placing his palm near River's mane. The lion lowered his head to the table with trembling slowness, but this time positioned himself slightly more toward Ethan. He was showing them his weaker side. Lauren's voice came out in a whisper. He's presenting us with the injury that hurts most. Because he trusts you'll let us fix it. Ethan swallowed hard. River. His voice faltered with emotion he didn't want to show in front of the others. All right, Lauren said quietly. Let's work. And Cole, don't go anywhere. For the next 40 minutes, the room moved carefully, systematically, guided by both medical procedure and the strange, delicate bond unfolding between the man and the dying lion. Every painful motion River endured, he endured with his gaze locked on Ethan. Not one staff member missed the significance. By the time they finished, River was exhausted. His head sank into the padding, body heaving with shallow breaths. And yet, before slipping into another round of fragile sleep, River did one more impossible thing. He nudged his muzzle weakly, tremblingly, toward Ethan's hand. A gesture of trust, a gesture of surrender, a gesture no wild lion should ever make. Lauren stared as though witnessing something holy. This changes everything, she whispered. Everything we thought we knew. Ethan didn't answer. He simply rested his hand near River's mane, letting the lion feel he was there, letting him rest without fear for the first time in weeks. He stayed that way long after the staff left the room. River slept with quieter breaths, and Ethan stayed beside him, realizing the truth that had been forming silently since the canyon. This was no longer a rescue. It was the beginning of something neither of them understood, and neither could walk away from. Over the next 48 hours, Haven Ridge settled into a strange, cautious rhythm, one dictated not by charts, not by protocols, not even by Lauren's 2 decades of experience, but by the steady presence of a man sitting beside a lion who should not have survived the night. Ethan barely left the recovery bay, except to wash his hands, refill a coffee cup, or pace outside long enough to stretch his stiffened muscles. River never let him out of sight. By the 3rd morning, River's condition had stabilized enough for slow, careful feeding. The lion remained frighteningly thin, his muscles wasted, but his breathing was no longer the ragged fight it had been in Wyoming. Color, very faint but unmistakable, had begun returning to the tissue around his eyes, and the swelling in his paws had reduced just enough for a hint of relief to soften his posture. But what drew the staff together in uneasy whispers was something far harder to quantify. River's behavior was changing. Every time Ethan walked into the room, even before he spoke, River's ears twitched, catching the sound of his footsteps. Every time Ethan settled near the table, River shifted to face him. And when Ethan drifted off into short bouts of exhausted sleep, River's eye stayed open, watching him with a quiet vigilance that unsettled even the most seasoned caretakers. Lauren observed everything, her arms folded, her face caught somewhere between Tarakulos, curiosity, and disbelief. This is imprinting, she murmured more than once. But lions don't imprint, not like this, not on adults, and certainly not under trauma. On the morning of the 3rd day, she pulled Ethan aside while 2 techs replaced River's IV lines. Cole, she said quietly, I need to understand something. He rubbed his eyes, heavy with days of fatigue. What's that? What exactly happened down there in that pit? How long were you with him? What did you do before the rescue team arrived? Ethan shook his head. Nothing special. I just talked to him, tried to keep him awake, tried to keep him calm. Did he react to anyone else before we got him here? No. Lauren nodded slowly, as if confirming something she wished she didn't believe. Animals in River's condition should withdraw completely, shut down. But he's doing the opposite. He's seeking out a bond. That only happens in 2 scenarios: early developmental imprinting, or extreme trauma paired with a single stabilizing figure. Ethan frowned. You're saying he's treating me like, what, a safety anchor? I'm saying, Lauren replied gently, "that he may be treating you like the only familiar thing left in his world." Before Ethan could respond, a tremor of movement came from the table. River was trying to shift positions again. One of the techs stepped back in surprise as the lion's head lifted several inches, a monumental effort for an animal this weak. His eyes scanned the room until they found Ethan. The lion's breathing slowed. Lauren sighed. "There's your answer." Ethan approached the table slowly. "Easy, easy, River." River lowered his head again, settling into the padding with a faint, tired exhale that sounded more like relief. The tech whispered under his breath, "It's like he's waiting for permission to breathe." The afternoon brought a new milestone. After days of only fluid nutrition, Lauren decided they could attempt direct feeding, small, soft pieces of meat, measured precisely to avoid overwhelming River's compromised digestive system. 2 staff members prepared tranquilizer guns as a safety precaution. Ethan didn't like the sight of them. "He's too weak to lunge," he said. "It's protocol," Lauren replied. "Even the gentlest animal can react unpredictably under stress." River was awake but lethargic when Ethan stepped into the enclosed recovery pen, carrying the small feeding bowl. The lion tracked him instantly, his dull amber eyes sharpening with intent. Ethan knelt several feet away. "Hey, big guy, I brought you something." Lauren watched from behind the reinforced barrier. Every muscle in her body was tensed. Ethan held a piece of meat between tongs, extended one slow, steady arm forward, and waited. The entire room fell silent. River inhaled. His nostrils flared weakly. His jaw shifted. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly, he lifted his head enough to reach the piece of meat. His tongue extended, brushing against the metal tongs as he took the food into his mouth without aggression. Gasps broke out among the staff. Ethan offered another piece. "That's it. You're doing good." River ate again, weak, cautious, but present. The lion who had nearly died in a buried cage was now accepting food, like a house cat too exhausted to pretend it was wild. Lauren recorded another note on her tablet. Her voice shook. "This isn't normal. This is not remotely normal." After 20 minutes, River had eaten the precise amount cleared by Lauren. When Ethan stood to leave, River made a low, soft sound. A breath more than a vocalization, but a sound directed entirely at him. Ethan paused. "You want me to stay?" The lion blinked once. Ethan sat back down. That evening, something happened that solidified what Lauren had feared and respected since the moment she saw River react to Ethan on the table. While cleaning River's shoulder wound, Ethan's hand brushed gently against the lion's mane. River's eyes drifted closed, and a vibration rose from his chest. Not a growl, not a warning, but a deep, primal rumble that resonated with a sound reminiscent of contentment. Lauren stared. That is as close to a purr as a lion can make." Ethan froze, stunned by the gentle tremor under his fingertips. River leaned into the touch. Leaned. A wild lion scarred by captivity, weakened by starvation, and nearly dead 3 days earlier, leaned into a human hand as though welcoming it. Lauren backed away slightly, lowering her voice. "Cole, this bond you're forming, it's going to change the course of his recovery." Ethan looked up. "Is that good or bad?" Lauren hesitated. "Ask me again in a month." The facility grew quiet that night as lights dimmed and staff went home. Only 2 night shift techs remained, charting vitals from the side room. Ethan stayed by River's enclosure, sitting cross-legged on the floor outside the bars. River, half asleep, shifted just enough for their lines of sight to meet through the metal mesh. For a moment, neither moved. Then River stretched his front paw forward, not aggressively, not reaching, but resting it near the mesh as though closing the distance between them. Ethan exhaled softly. "We'll get through this." River blinked, slow and heavy. The bond between them had crossed a threshold, one no protocol could account for, and no training manual could explain. In that quiet, dim-lit room, a lion and a man shared a moment that belonged not to instinct, not to logic, but to something far older and deeper. Something that was no longer just survival, but recognition. The days at Haven Ridge settled into an uneasy pattern, River healing in small, painful increments, and Ethan never more than a few feet away. The bond between them wasn't whispered about anymore. It was openly acknowledged, studied, questioned. Even the most skeptical staff had stopped rolling their eyes. River behaved differently when Ethan entered the room, and differently still when Ethan left it. Patterns like that weren't coincidence. By the end of the first week, River could lift his head for longer stretches. He would track Ethan through the enclosure's reinforced glass with slow, deliberate movement, never frantic, never fearful, but with the quiet vigilance of an animal that had chosen its one safe place in a world that had nearly killed it. Lauren watched all of it with increasing concern. "Behaviorally, he's not acting like a wild lion," she said one afternoon, scratching notes into her tablet. "He's acting like a lion with a primary attachment figure." "That's not possible," one of the techs muttered. Lauren answered without looking up. "And yet here we are." River's recovery, fragile as it was, felt miraculous. But behind that miracle was a growing tension, one the staff tried not to talk about, though Ethan felt it whenever he saw hushed voices on the other side of the hall. How did he get here? Why Wyoming? Who owned that pit? What were they doing with a live lion? No one had answers. Not until the third night after River stabilized enough to stand. Ethan had gone outside to breathe the crisp Montana air. Pine trees loomed tall behind the facility, their needles whispering with the wind. A few stars pierced the sky, and the security lights cast long shadows across the gravel walkway. He took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth return to his fingers after hours inside the cold medical suite. Then he saw them. Tire tracks. Fresh. Still crisp in the dirt along the outer fence. He crouched to inspect them. The tread pattern wasn't from any Haven Ridge staff vehicle. He'd memorized those already. These were wider, deeper, newer. Someone had been parked along the fence line, watching. He straightened slowly, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the floodlights. The trees stood silent. No movement. But a cold prickle ran along the back of his neck. He headed straight for the main office. Inside, Lauren was reviewing River's charts. She looked up sharply as Ethan walked in. "You all right?" she asked. "No," Ethan said bluntly. "We've had visitors." Lauren frowned. "What kind of visitors?" "The kind who leave tire tracks at midnight." She set her tablet down slowly. "Show me." They went outside together. Lauren knelt beside the tracks, tracing the grooves with her fingertips. Her expression darkened. "That's no ranch truck," she murmured, "and not a ranger vehicle." "No," Ethan said. "This is someone watching us." Lauren stood. "I'll notify security." But before she could reach for her radio, a voice came from behind them. "You won't need to. I already called it in." It was Samuel Hartman, the federal wildlife investigator stationed at Haven Ridge this month. A quiet, sharp-eyed man with a reputation for dissecting illegal wildlife networks with surgical precision. Samuel had the weary patience of someone who'd seen too many crimes hidden under the surface of good landscapes. "Those tracks match a type of off-road SUV we've seen used in trafficking routes," he said. "Mexico to Texas, Texas to private airstrips. Same pattern, same tire tread." Ethan's stomach dropped. "So they're here?" "Not yet," Samuel said. "But someone is watching, and they know exactly what's inside that medical wing." Lauren crossed her arms. "How would they even know River is alive? We haven't released any public statements." Samuel hesitated. "Because the people who lost him weren't small-time amateurs. Whoever built that pit in Wyoming, whoever chained him and kept him alive long enough for transport, they were expecting to retrieve him. And when they return and find an empty hole, they'll come looking," Ethan finished. Samuel nodded grimly. "They have a product worth a lot of money," he added quietly. "And you, Mr. Cole, have just interfered in one of the most profitable sectors of illegal wildlife trade." The weight of Samuel's words hung in the cold night air. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him in a way that had nothing to do with fear, something heavier, something personal. He thought of River lying in that pit, too weak to fight, too weak to breath, yet still lifting his head to look at him. River had trusted him, chosen him, and now that trust had put a target on both their backs. Lauren broke the silence. "We increased security. No one enters River's wing without clearance. No exceptions." Samuel nodded. "And we place cameras along the tree line. They were scouting tonight. They'll be back." Ethan tightened his jaw. "Let them come." Lauren shot him a sharp look. "Be careful what you say." Ethan lowered his voice. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I'm not letting anyone take him back." Later, Ethan returned to River's enclosure. The lion was awake, his breathing steady but shallow. River lifted his head the second Ethan stepped into view, eyes softening in recognition. "Hey, bud," Ethan said gently, kneeling beside the barrier. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest. You know that?" River blinked once, slow and deliberate. Ethan exhaled. "We'll handle it, I promise." The lion's amber eyes locked onto his, unblinking, as though he understood more than any animal should. A night shift tech approached timidly. "Cole? Lauren wants you in the office when you can." Ethan nodded but kept his eyes on River for one more moment. "I'll be back." When he rose to leave, River's breathing hitched. Just once. Just enough for Ethan to pause. The lion was watching him like he watched every movement Ethan made, as if gauging each step, as if the world steadied only when he stood near. Ethan whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." Only then did River relax, head lowering to the straw bedding with a soft exhale. The tech whispered under his breath, "He looks at you like you're his anchor." Ethan didn't respond, because deep down he knew that was exactly what he had become. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, a floodlight flickered, and far beyond the fence, hidden by darkness, quiet as a held breath, someone watched the facility with the engine of a black SUV idling low. Waiting. Planning. Watching the lion who should have been theirs, and the man who had taken him. The tension thickened over Haven Ridge like an invisible fog. Security lights burned brighter. Cameras flickered with new red recording dots. Staff moved in pairs at night, glancing toward the tree line the way people do when they sense a predator close by. But inside River's recovery wing, everything was quiet. So still, it felt like another world entirely. Ethan stayed even later than usual that night, long after the evening charts were logged and the hallways emptied. River had eaten his last measured meal and finally drifted into a deeper sleep, his breaths slow but steady. Ethan sat near the enclosure wall on the concrete floor, leaning back, legs stretched out, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. He should have gone to the staff quarters. He should have slept like a normal person. But the idea of walking away when River still watched him so intently every time he moved, he couldn't do it. Around midnight, the facility settled into silence. Even the fluorescent lights in the hallway outside had dimmed to half strength. A night tech murmured something to the other across the hall. Then their voices faded. The world shrank to Ethan's breathing and the soft rustling coming from inside River's enclosure. For a long, peaceful while, River slept. Then, without warning, he stirred. It wasn't a twitch or a reflex. It was purposeful. A heavy, trembling shift of his massive shoulders as he fought through whatever exhaustion held him down. Ethan sat up straight, alert. "River?" he whispered. The lion's eyelids fluttered open. But this time, River didn't just look toward Ethan. He tried to stand. Ethan scrambled to his feet. "Easy. Easy, big guy. Don't rush it." River's front legs trembled violently as he pushed upward, the muscles barely able to support him. His chest rose and fell quickly with the effort. Ethan stepped to the very edge of the enclosure barrier, hands pressed against the mesh. "River, slow down. You don't have to get up." The lion wobbled but kept trying. He wasn't rising out of fear or confusion. Something else was driving him. Something internal, instinctive. When he finally got his chest off the ground, he paused, panting shallowly, head hanging low. "River, look at me." At the sound of Ethan's voice, River's head lifted. The lion looked at him and took one unsteady step forward. The techs had warned this moment would come eventually, but no one, least of all Ethan, expected it so soon. River's legs shook with each inch of movement. His tail dragged across the floor. His body sagged, ribs showing with every breath. But the lion's eyes stayed locked on Ethan's face with a strange, almost searching intensity. Ethan swallowed hard. "You're okay, River. I'm right here." The lion took another step. The effort alone nearly toppled him. Ethan braced his hands against the barrier, torn between wanting to rush into the enclosure and knowing he'd violate every safety rule the center had. But the lion kept pushing forward, trembling but determined. Then, halfway across the enclosure, River froze. Ethan held his breath. The lion's breathing shifted, no longer the labored panting of an exhausted body, but something deeper, heavier. As if emotion itself sat on his chest, River swayed once, twice. Ethan's heart dropped. "River, stop. You don't have to come closer. Please, just rest." But River didn't stop. With a final push of strength he should not have had, the lion stepped forward and pressed his head, his full, weighty head, against the metal barrier separating them. Not hard, not desperate, but deliberately, as if offering the only gesture he had left. Ethan's breath broke. He pressed both hands against the mesh, fingertips trembling. "River." The lion didn't move. He stood there, leaning the side of his face into the bars, eyes half closed. Not in pain, not in fear, but in something Ethan had never seen in an apex predator. Something soft, something deep, something like trust wrapped in exhaustion. A sound rumbled from River's chest, quiet, low, steady. It wasn't a growl. It was the same fragile tremor Ethan had felt days earlier, the closest thing to a purr a lion could give. A sound of recognition, a sound of safety, a sound meant only for him. Ethan felt his chest tighten so sharply he had to swallow hard against the weight of it. He lowered his forehead to the cold metal bars between them. "I'm here," he whispered. His voice wasn't steady. "I'm here, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." A rustle behind him made Ethan turn. One of the night techs had stopped in the doorway, eyes wide, hands covering her mouth. "God," she breathed. He's bonding with you." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. River shifted just enough to press more of his weight into the barrier. Ethan pressed his palms against the mesh, wanting to give whatever comfort he could without risking the lion's fragile autonomy. Minutes passed. The world outside the enclosure no longer existed. No cameras, no watchers, no threat waiting in the dark. Just a dying lion offering the last piece of himself to the man who refused to abandon him. Eventually, River's strength waned. His legs buckled slightly. Ethan straightened. "Okay, big guy. You need to lie down." River hesitated, long enough to look at Ethan again. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the floor with a controlled, careful descent, never breaking eye contact until he could no longer keep his head raised. When he finally settled, Ethan sat beside the barrier, sliding down until he was level with River's gaze. The lion's eyelids drooped, body exhausted. But before sleep took him, River extended one paw, just enough that the tips of his claws brushed the metal near Ethan's feet. Ethan closed his eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know. I'm right here." River slept with a steadier breath that night. Deep, slow, anchored. And Ethan stayed where he was, leaning back against the barrier, keeping vigil the same way he had in the pit. To any outsider, it would have looked impossible. But to Ethan, it felt like the only thing that ever made sense. Later, hours later, he woke briefly to a faint sound. Somewhere outside, gravel crunched under tires. A car door shut softly. A shadow moved past the security lights. But by the time Ethan rose to his feet and stepped outside, the vehicle was already gone, slipping into the darkness, its engine a low growl fading into the night. Someone had returned. Someone who wasn't ready to let go of River. And the next time, they wouldn't just watch. Ethan barely slept the rest of the night. Every creak of the building, every hum of the security lights outside set his nerves on edge. He paced the hallway, checked each camera monitor twice, sometimes 3 times, then drifted back to River's enclosure just to reassure himself that the lion was still breathing, still resting, still safe. River slept most of the night curled on his side, chest rising in slow, even waves. But every so often, those heavy amber eyes would open, not out of fear, not out of discomfort, but simply to make sure Ethan was still there. And Ethan always was. By dawn the next morning, Haven Ridge wasn't the quiet sanctuary it had been. Samuel Hartman and 2 federal agents had stationed themselves at the front gate. The sanctuary staff whispered in cautious clusters. Even the animals sensed the tension. Wolves pacing restlessly in their enclosures, elk turning skittish at passing shadows. Ethan walked into the main office to find Lauren already there, arms crossed, brows drawn tight. "You saw the cameras?" she asked. He nodded. Same SUV, same driver, watching the medical wing. Lauren exhaled, frustration and fatigue mixing in her voice. "We are not equipped for security threats like this. We're a sanctuary, not a fortress." Samuel spoke without looking up from a stack of printed reports. "They'll escalate. Trafficking rings don't just let prize animals disappear. A lion in this condition, still alive? He's worth a fortune in black market circles. The people who owned him aren't going to walk away." Lauren rubbed her temples. "We can't move him yet. He's too weak. But keeping him here puts a target on this entire facility." Samuel turned to Ethan. "Which brings us to the decision you have to make." Ethan stiffened. "What decision?" Samuel slid a folder across the table. Ethan's own personnel file, recently pulled from Wyoming's Ranger Division. "You saved his life," Samuel said. "That fact is known. Those tire tracks, they weren't scouting Haven Ridge, they were scouting you." Lauren added quietly, "They want you out of the way." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I'm not leaving him." "That," Samuel replied, "is exactly what puts him in danger." A silence spread across the room, heavy and cold. Lauren broke it gently. "Ethan, you've formed something with him. Something we've all witnessed. But River cannot depend solely on one person. He needs medical structure, controlled rehabilitation, boundaries that allow him to recover without imprinting in ways that could harm him later." Ethan's voice was low. He won't eat when I leave. You've seen it. We can work through that, Lauren said, slowly, carefully. But Samuel shook his head. We don't have time for slow. The people who did this, they know your name, your face, your truck. If they can't take River back, they may try to erase the one person who ties him to them. Ethan stared at the table, jaw tight enough to ache. He'd seen danger before in the wildfire lines, in search and rescue missions, in the desperate eyes of people waiting for rescue. But this felt different. This wasn't just risk. This was a threat built in shadows, tracking him across state lines. Then Lauren said the words he'd been dreading. We're recommending River be relocated to a secure wildlife facility in Arizona, a federal site, protected, monitored. Ethan's head snapped up. No, you can't move him now. He's not strong enough. He's stronger than he was, Lauren said softly, and staying here puts him in more danger than the move. Ethan shook his head again. He won't understand. He'll think I left him. Lauren's expression was sympathetic but unyielding. If you stay here with him, you both become targets. If you leave, he deteriorates emotionally. We're stuck. Samuel leaned forward. There is one option. Both Lauren and Ethan looked at him. What option? Ethan asked. You go with him. Lauren blinked. Samuel, it solves both problems, Samuel said. River keeps his stabilizing figure. You stay under federal protection, and the trafficking ring won't track him to Arizona as easily. It's a closed facility, highly guarded. Ethan felt his breath catch. Go with him. To Arizona. For months. Maybe years. Leaving everything. Wyoming, his job, the life he knew, and yet, when he pictured River being loaded into a transport truck without him, lying terrified and weak on a metal crate surrounded by strangers, his stomach twisted. I can't just abandon my post in Wyoming, Ethan said quietly. There's protocol, chains of command, Lauren interrupted gently. Ethan, your supervisors already know. Samuel briefed them last night. They've approved an extended leave of absence. If you agree to accompany River, your job will be held. Ethan stared at her. You've already planned all this. We've prepared for all outcomes, Lauren said, including the one that keeps River alive. The weight of it settled into the room like a storm cloud. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, Lauren placed a hand on Ethan's arm. Go see him, she whispered. Then decide. Ethan walked down the hall, each step heavier than the last. When he reached River's enclosure, the lion was awake, lying with his head raised just enough to see the doorway. The moment Ethan stepped inside, River's eyes softened, his shoulders relaxing into the bedding. Ethan pressed his palm lightly to the mesh. Hey, buddy. River made a low, soft sound, a barely there rumble, then shifted his body, slowly, painfully, exposing his side. The same gesture he made days ago, offering his injury, trusting Ethan to help. But this time it meant something else. A plea. Stay. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. He sank to his knees, leaning close enough for River to see his face clearly. They want to move you, he whispered. Arizona. Somewhere safer. River blinked once, slow as falling ash. And they want me to go with you. The lion's breathing slowed, not in fear, not in confusion, but in that same clear, watching way he had in the pit. As though reading Ethan, measuring him, waiting. I don't know what to do, Ethan breathed. His voice trembled. I don't know what's right, but I'm not leaving you alone again. Not after what you've been through. River shifted his weight, placing his massive front paw closer to the mesh, claws retracted, pads pressing gently against the barrier in front of Ethan. A gesture so deliberate Ethan's breath hitched. You're asking me to come, he whispered. River closed his eyes. Not in exhaustion, but in something that looked painfully close to trust. And that was it. The moment the decision made itself. Ethan pressed his hand against the lion's paw through the mesh. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll go with you." For the first time since Wyoming, River's chest rose with a deeper breath. Not strong, not healed, but steadier, calmer. Ethan straightened, wiping a hand across his eyes. "We'll get through this," he told him. "Together." In the doorway, Lauren watched silently. She didn't speak, didn't step forward. She simply nodded once, knowing she had witnessed something sacred. Ethan Cole had made his choice, not out of duty, not out of fear, but out of a bond no one could have predicted. And as the morning sun rose over Haven Ridge, washing the sanctuary in gold, the next chapter of their lives began. One that would take them far from Montana, far from everything familiar, into a future neither man nor lion could yet imagine. The transfer happened quietly, long before the public ever knew River was leaving. Federal agents coordinated the route, the timing, the decoy vehicles. Even the Haven Ridge staff moved with a reverent hush, aware this was not merely a transport. It was a crossing. A turning point. Ethan stood beside the reinforced crate as River was sedated with the smallest dose allowable. The lion fought the sleep as long as he could, eyes locked on Ethan's face until the very last moment. Only when Ethan laid a hand on the side of the crate and whispered, "I'm right here," did River finally let his head sink down. The journey to Arizona was long. 16 hours of winding roads, federal escorts, checkpoints, and the low hum of engines. Ethan rode in the back of the transport truck, knees drawn up, watching the steady rise and fall of River's breathing. He wasn't allowed inside the crate for safety, but he stayed close enough that if River stirred, Ethan was the first voice he would hear. Every bump in the road made Ethan grip the metal frame. Every pause in River's breathing made him hold his own. By the time they reached the Arizona facility, a sprawling, high-security wildlife refuge tucked behind red rock cliffs, dawn was breaking again. The sky glowed with desert light, the kind that made the world feel new. Agents unloaded River carefully, rolling the crate toward the transitional habitat prepared just for him. A dry breeze swept across the sand, carrying the faint scent of sage. The air was warmer here, brighter, almost humming. River woke slowly inside the enclosure, disoriented, confused. His vision sharpened, pupils narrowing at the change of light. He pushed himself upright, sides heaving with the effort. The habitat stretched before him, 6 acres of rock shelves, sun-warmed earth, shaded dens, and grasses swaying in the desert wind. A place built not to cage him, but to give him room to live. But River did not look at any of it. He only looked for Ethan. He paced once, unsteady, deliberate, searching the boundary. When he spotted Ethan approaching through the walkway, the lion froze. The air between them stilled. For a heartbeat, the world was nothing but 2 silhouettes meeting in the morning light. Then River moved, not with the frantic fear of an animal waking in a strange place, but with purpose. Shoulders lifting, tail low, steps dragging from exhaustion, yet driven by recognition. Ethan walked to the reinforced barrier, breath catching as River closed the last few feet. The lion reached him first. He pressed his forehead against the fence, harder than he ever had before, pushing his full weight into the steel as if trying to bridge the space between them. Ethan placed both palms on the metal, leaning into the gesture. Their shadows merged on the desert sand, man and lion side by side. "Hey, buddy," Ethan whispered, voice thick with emotion. "We made it." River rumbled a low, resonant sound, deeper than the fragile purr he had made during recovery, steadier, stronger. A sound no one at the facility had ever heard from a lion greeting a human. Somewhere behind Ethan, staff members stopped in their tracks, awe spreading across their faces. They all knew they were witnessing something rare, something that didn't belong to science alone. Over the weeks that followed, River thrived in ways no one could have predicted. His weight increased, his muscles rebuilt, his coat regained its golden sheen, catching sunlight like fire. He explored the rocks, tested his strength on fallen branches, soaked in the heat of the desert sun. And every day, he returned to Ethan, sometimes at dawn, sometimes at dusk, pressing his head into the barrier as if reaffirming a bond time could not thin. Ethan adjusted to his new life as well. He moved into a small residence on the sanctuary grounds, helping with other rescues, assisting veterinarians, and spending hours documenting River's progress. At night, he sometimes sat outside under the Arizona sky, feeling the vast, quiet weight of the journey behind them. He hadn't planned for any of this. He hadn't expected to trade Wyoming's mountains for desert cliffs. But when he looked at River, alive, healed, free in the only way he now could be, Ethan knew the path had never really been a choice. It had simply been a calling. Federal reports soon confirmed that the trafficking network responsible for River's capture had been dismantled. Arrests in New Mexico and Texas connected to evidence gathered from the buried pit. A dozen individuals charged, operations halted. When Ethan read the message, he walked straight to River's habitat. The lion approached, head high, mane beginning to thicken around his neck. Ethan knelt near the barrier. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe." River exhaled slowly, chest rising and falling with the kind of peace only a soul that has survived the unthinkable can know. Months turned into a year. River's territory was expanded, giving him room to roam and rest under the wide desert sky. He grew into his full weight, his frame powerful and proud. Visitors to the sanctuary heard whispers of the lion who chose a man, though most never saw more than a distant silhouette moving behind the rocks. But those who worked closely at the refuge witnessed moments that seemed almost mythic. River waiting at the boundary for Ethan's morning rounds. River lowering his head at the sound of Ethan's voice. River walking in slow, perfect step beside Ethan along opposite sides of the fence, two figures cast in amber light. The connection never faded. 3 years after the rescue, the sun dipped low over the Arizona cliffs, staining the world in deep crimson and gold. Ethan made his way to the overlook where River often rested at dusk. As he approached, River rose from his platform and padded towards the fence. The golden lion stopped inches away, eyes reflecting the sunset. Ethan stepped forward. River pressed his head into the barrier, just like he had in Montana, just like he had in the pit, just like he had during every turning point of his new life. This time, the gesture felt like a full circle closing. "I don't know why you chose me," Ethan whispered, voice shaking with memory, "but I'm grateful you did." River blinked slowly, lowering his head until it almost touched Ethan's chest through the metal. Above them, the sky blazed with fading light, painting the desert in a wash of fire and shadow. Two survivors of different worlds standing together on the thin line between wild and human, bound by something no one could name. And as night settled over the desert, Ethan realized something profound. He had saved River's life. But River had saved something in him too. A man and a lion, walking parallel paths until the very end, proving that sometimes the most unlikely bonds become the ones that change everything. If you felt something in your heart during their journey, let me know by dropping a simple 1 in the comments. If you were speechless, just type 0. Your small comment helps this story reach someone who might need it today. And if you'd like to follow more true rescue stories like this, raw, emotional, and full of hope, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll be here, waiting to share the next chapter with you.